Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest IGB webinar. My name is Daniel O'Boyle. I'm the Deputy Editor for iGaming Business in Dice365, and I'll be your host for this webinar in the first of our Road to the World Cup series. This one is titled Preparing Your Sportsbook Product, and it's sponsored by BTO Bet. We're now less than 2 months away from the World Cup, which will surely be a huge betting event all across the globe. So with that in mind, we're looking at how operators can prepare. A lot of that will involve dealing with the huge amounts of traffic the World Cup will undoubtedly bring. But we're also going to look at how to optimize the customer experience for an event like this and how to compete for players. Our session is being recorded and it will be available after the webinar ends. Audience members will also have the opportunity to ask questions via the form that should be on the right of the webinar client. And you can also, if you don't have a question yourself, you can still thumbs up questions that you think are interested in, so that we know that they might be a priority. With me today, we have three excellent guests who will all be introducing themselves. Dima, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and BTOBet is very happy to sponsor this exciting topic. So my name is Dima. I've been with BTOBet coming up to 2 years now. I'm managing director of the company. Previously, I worked as the Chief Operations Officer for Aspire Global. So I've been in the industry for just about a decade now, and really looking for the World Cup. I always approach these events with mixed feelings. You know, I want to watch the bottom line for me and our partners, but at the same time, I'm a huge football fan. So, you know, on one hand, you're looking forward to have as many goals and exciting matches as you wish. On the other hand, sometimes quietly in the corner, you're praying for a 0-0 or a 1-1 to get that bottom line up. So a very exciting event coming up.
Great, thanks. And then Alexander?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for having me on, Daniel. I appreciate BTOBet also sponsoring the event. I've been with Matchbook now for the past 3 years, and we're just starting to move into the B2B world, working with other operators and suppliers. So really keen to sort of share my thoughts, talk about a little bit about what we're doing, and compare notes on what the exchanges as well as the sportsbooks are doing for the World Cup.
Yeah, and then finally, Nick.
Yeah, hi Daniel, hi guys, hi everyone. Thanks for having me on. So I'm Nick Marudis, and I'm the current CTO at Quiff. I've been with Quiff for about 4 years now, but just like Dima, I've been in the industry for approximately 10 years. Previously at Paddy and Betfair. Yeah, it's an exciting time for us as we're going into a period of hypergrowth. So, you know, the World Cup comes around every 4 years. We can just remember when we started the last World Cup. So we're quite excited, you know, being ready for this one. So yeah, happy to share my thoughts of where we are.
Yeah, great. So to start with, just how big a betting event are we anticipating this World Cup to be? Is there a good comparison, whether it's to the 2018 edition or to any previous events that you think might compare?
I can take it if you like. I'll start. You guys can jump in if you disagree. But for us, truly, I think in Europe, as we're European-based, or if you like, UK-based at the moment, so we draw a line with the Euros, or comparison with the Euros. I think one of the things, though, that we do see is probably time zone for us will probably be a larger issue. So to gather the excitement around this event is probably going to be one of the bigger challenges for all operators, particularly in the UK. You know, there's no EPL, but there is first and second division football still, which is a big thing for us. So it's around keeping the excitement around the World Cup, but also trying to keep players with us through the tournament. So yeah, 4 games a day. Some games probably not as exciting as others, but yeah, we'll try gather that excitement and try get involved.
I agree. I totally agree with Nick's inputs. It's just to recap the previous World Cup. We have a bit of a more spread out, not only European operation. I did some Googling before this call, if I'm full disclosure. It seems to be approximately 140 billion placed in bets on the previous World Cup, and that's 4 years ago, right? Almost 5 years ago. So I think if we take account, the technology that's been advanced on a global scale since then, right? The accessibility of mobile wagering, the reduced cost of data in some of the more developing countries, I think we're definitely going to beat that record. On a global level, I think the scale of this tournament is definitely going to be bigger than that. The final, it seems like the final hosted 7 billion in bets, which is, it's an impressive number by itself. It will be interesting to see if we'll be able to go higher than that. Everybody's talking about the fact that this is a winter event, probably first ever in terms of having the World Cup, and we'll probably talk about it more later today in terms of the differences, of having this during the winter rather than the kind of dead period over the summer. But the other thing is we have 32 teams, and it's actually the last time that we know of that we're going to have 32 teams in such a tournament, right? Because as of the next one that goes into North America, and it's 50% more. It's going to be 48 teams coming in. So it's very interesting to see if that will have any effect. But overall, I think it's going to be a huge, huge event. There's a really good, healthy balance of strong teams coming from all corners of the world, right? You have strong teams, relatively strong teams from Asia. You have strong teams in South America. Europe's always there. You have the up-and-comers from Africa. So really a very diverse, I think, tournament. And in conjunction with what Nick mentioned, there's a lot of other sports going still in the background, including some major ones. I mean, we have the American leagues, all three major leagues going on in the background. We have the ATP, we have the Davis Cup, Formula One. I mean, it's really quite unique in that sense. And I think it presents challenges, which I'm sure we'll discuss later today. But I have to see the glass half full. I think it presents a tremendous business opportunity for the bookies, for all of us, for all the operators.
Yeah, I think Dima touched on a lot of sort of points I'd agree with there. I think the first one is, I think personally, a lot of the build-up has been slightly negative, obviously, given the location, first and foremost. And as you mentioned, Dima, the time of the year, we've already got an incredibly jam-packed football schedule with all the other leagues in full flow. And, I think everyone's been sort of watching with bated breath to see, is there going to be injuries to top players for certain teams that will have potentially quite a large effect as they go through the different stages of the tournament. But I think at the end of the day, as you both mentioned, it is the World Cup. And, for us, it's definitely one of the largest sporting events, probably the largest football event. So I think given, England went relatively close in the Euros last time, I think there's probably still a lot of hope and belief that they'll be going through to the later stages of the tournament. So anyone with the sort of UK-facing sportsbook or exchange for that matter, well, hope to see them go relatively far to see that sort of action and interest continue to be strong throughout the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what changes when there is this level of interest, whether it's sort of from a product perspective or marketing or really any perspective? What is different when there are this many potential customers?
Nick, you want to go ahead, or Alex?
Oh, okay. We'll keep the same way. I don't mind.
Sure.
I think if you look at something like a World Cup, it is a one-off every 4 years. So what changes is creating the excitement around it. I do draw parallels though with things like the Grand National. So that's a once-a-year event. Okay, it's a whole festival, but everyone piles in on the Saturday. And that's the kind of thing you look at the World Cup, even though it's over a period of weeks rather than just one day. So it's about creating that excitement, bringing people in, and keeping them interested and excited through the tournament. So if you're an England supporter, you'd hope that England goes all the way. As a bookie in the UK, you hope England goes all the way and then falls down at the end. As a South African, I've got no loyalties to anybody at the moment for the World Cup, but there we go. So yeah, for me, it's all about the excitement and creating it, and I think that's what changes. I don't say we don't do it on a day-to-day basis around our other sports, but I think it's something next level goes up there. It's a slightly increased level.
Agree. It seems like I'm the only non-UK fan on the call, but that's all right. I think we can. I'll represent the rest of the world then. If I'm going to focus specifically on what you mentioned in terms of the volumes of customers, right? I mean, I agree with everything Nick mentioned. I think that the volumes themselves present, for the technology providers, for the B2B side of things, but also the guys that own their own tech, I think that that's really kind of the pinnacle. That's really where your tech is being tested, right? Whatever your peak intake, whatever your peak performance is today, you're probably looking forward to peak that peak, right? To overcome it, to surpass that at least at the end of the tournament. Probably not at the early stages. Some of my friends here mentioned that some of the matches are not as exciting. I couldn't agree more. But as we go deeper into the tournament, there's definitely some excitement. It doesn't matter who plays, right? A semifinal is a semifinal. It doesn't really matter who plays that game. So I think that the volumes themselves are going to challenge the tech stacks and the operational teams of most companies out there. I think that whatever your benchmark and thresholds in terms of speed of settlement, speed of payouts, everything around the customer experience, which is it starts from the tech and then goes into operation. That's definitely going to be on test, on trial, so to speak. We've seen what it does when it doesn't work with some of the biggest names in the industry, talking about the Super Bowl last year. So I think everybody's kind of walking on eggshells. I know that a lot of people are nervous toward this. It's a good nervousness because it's what they call a rich man problem, right? Too many customers, too many bets. But it's definitely something to look for because you only get to nail it once. At the same time, Alex mentioned the multiple games a day. I think that the technological excellence also will play a big part of that, because if you ensure that first game bet, right, that paid out well in terms of the proper customer experience, right? So I'm putting luck aside, did I win or did I lose? But I've half my settlement paid out fast. I could bet that next bet on the second game, on the third game, on the fourth game, or maybe the parallel scores that are running around that. So I think that from a technology perspective, the volume of the clients that we're all expecting it to peak, so to speak. I think that's quite a unique challenge, and many of us in the industry will be tested, and only the best will come out as winners on the other end, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's a big shop window for your brand, for your sportsbook, for your product, for us as an exchange, because with any of these customers that you're going to hoping to be onboarding, you're hoping these customers are going to be with you throughout the rest of the Premier League season, potentially cross-selling into other sports and other sub-verticals you have on your platform. And so I think two words that sort of, I would really sort of reiterate, which you guys have pretty much touched on, is stress testing every sort of element of your book or your exchange from start to finish. It's also looking at the consistency throughout everything you're doing. We all want to have consistent customer service. We all want to have fast pay-ins and payouts, a smooth KYC journey, all the options for the types of markets that a customer needs and requires to be able to facilitate the action they're looking for. And it's trying to do that consistently well. I think everyone knows it's so important to start the tournament well, and you might get a bit of leeway throughout if there are certain issues in different areas. But, if you're not starting well and it's that only opportunity you're going to get for that customer to be acquired, and there's an element that might be struggling or not working, then effectively you can be shooting yourself in the foot. So there is a lot of pressure, but it's good pressure and it's exciting pressure. And I think for us, we're incredibly excited, and hopefully we believe we're in a position to really offer as competitive prices as we can and liquid markets as we can moving forward.
Yeah, so in that sort of worst case scenario that, it's the World Cup final and, product goes down, how big an impact is that? Is there a sense of, how much potential revenue could be lost, or just how severely that could impact business? And then, naturally then following from that, how important it obviously is to prevent something like that at all costs?
I can address a bit of it. So I'll address from I think Alex said it's a shop window for people to come into your brand. So it is definitely acquisition time, but it's also reactivation time. So you're effectively saying to people who've left you, come back, we've improved, we're amazing, we've got, etc. So come back. Technically, sorry, just to go back to that point, you don't want to mess that up because you've asked people for a second chance. Now, from a technical perspective, if you go down, obviously, as a CTO, for me, it's the worst possible outcome I could ever imagine. So my preparations is to ensure that we have stress tested our platform. We have made sure that the platform can scale, regardless of who comes, 1 or 10 million. we make sure that we can handle all of that. Now, if it should happen, you should have your redundancies in place. You should have your backups in place, so that at any point in time, you're not down for longer than X amount of time that's acceptable to your commercial business. And I think that's the approach, or the sensible approach that we've taken. From a commercial point of view, I think others may have different views, but for us, it's all about making sure that the technical side stays up, and a customer can always come on, can always see what's going on, and they always communicate it with. That's the view we have.
Yeah, so I don't have a lot after that. I think everybody's kind of prefer to avoid talking about what if. I think you can really color it. There's 3 points to that. There's the immediate revenue loss. I mean, you're down, you're losing money as it goes. So the clock ticks, so to speak. And Nick mentioned that you want to be back up and running as soon as you can. If that happens, then the second layer of that is that, especially if there's multiple events on that day, but even if without it, obviously there's the loss of future revenue, right? The same customer is going to go and he's going to switch the bookie. That's it. So I can't place a bet with you. I'm just going to place a bet on the next shop, which, given the nature of online business, it's literally 2 clicks away. So it's quite simple. Also, usually clients have, what is the average that I remember? It's like 3 to 5 active accounts, right? Every one of those clients we have. So it's really easy to move out from, bookie A to bookie B. So there's the future loss of revenue. And then, probably more on the B2B side, there's the reputational damage, right? I mean, if you're notoriously down or something major happens, it will be very difficult to gain back the trust of your future prospects, just as it would be for your end users, for your potential business partners at the end, right? So I think that, again, coming back to the most notorious example we have in recent history, we've seen the effect of what happened when something big happens in the States, in a big event. There's been a lot of talk about it. There's, share prices going down, acquisitions being made. I mean, I think it really stirred off something that was already in motion, but kind of amplified that and maybe put it on a faster track. But to end on a positive note, I wish to all of us in the industry that that's not going to happen again.
Here. Yeah, no, I agree with all those points, and I think the effects are always going to be catastrophic at the end of the day, given the scope of the opportunity of the World Cup. But at what stage is also a very big question to ask. If it goes down in the final, it doesn't get much bigger than that. If it's a group game, of 2 teams that probably have no chance of going through to the next stage, it's still very bad. Do not get me wrong, because you're effectively destroying customer loyalty and future business. But there's different levels of risk in that respect. And so while you can try and plan for them all, I think it's very hard to put a number on revenue. I think it varies for, different businesses based on risk appetite, pricing, loads of different things. But ultimately, I think, I think Chris mentioned the stress testing there. And, I think that's one of the biggest points to reiterate is if you cover every base as much as you can and you prepare for every sort of potential outcome, you're giving yourself the best chance for success throughout the tournament. And, one of the things that we do to offer, other operators, from a risk management perspective, is hedging, so that if there are situations where they're in a big position of exposure, we can actually help them with things like that. So it's always looking about, having a plan B for if these situations do occur.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned a little bit there with hedging, some of the features of your unique position as an exchange. Do you view these sorts of tournaments differently to a traditional bookmaker? And how so?
Yeah, a little bit, and also not a little bit. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a low margin product trying to compete for customers, against sports bookmakers with a slightly higher margin. But, our aim is not to cannibalize the sportsbook customer market and the retail. We have a slightly different customer demographic that we try and go after. But also, we know the value that we place on being able to help sportsbooks, and the reason why we've actually started offering hedging as a service, so that if there is exposure and they want to, try and limiting their biggest customers, we're a sort of safety valve for that. And I think already we've 12, 14, operators from sort of tier 1 down to tier 3 in the build up to the World Cup just as an outlet if they need it there. Not every business needs to hedge. It's totally, the strategy of the trading team for each operator, but it's just another tool. And that's why we've sort of, do both B2B and B2C now for that matter.
And then, we've talked a lot about sort of product-related questions. Then, from a more marketing side of things, how can operators stay competitive at a time like this, whenever everyone is competing so hard to acquire the best customers?
I'm happy to take that one, or would someone else like to take the mic? Speaking for a couple of minutes now. I can let Nick or Dima take that one.
Nick, should you go ahead? We should use the usual order.
Yeah, sure. Because you're speaking to a marketeer here, of course. So I think the difficulty is ensuring that the offers or the promotions that you're putting out there, actually you honor them as an operator. I think the worst thing you could do is have something out there, a punter comes on and doesn't get what you promised. Regardless of whether there are items that or things that they have to do to get the promo, I think you've got to be clear and concise and not lie. So I'm not saying that people do, but I'm just saying that it has to be clear about what you're offering from the get-go. And I think that there is a slight difference there. And don't offer same old. Betting gets a boring one, from my personal point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. We're a bit of it. We're a B2B. We don't have Alexander's perspective. We're a B2C here. But I think that from a product perspective, from a player experience, probably it will start, if I'm crossing over to marketing a little bit, probably you'll start with some FTP products, right? Some kind of something to help you that acquisition wave, kind of to build up your audience before the World Cup. And then I think that some of the sportsbook, the features have been introduced in the last few years. We've seen the beginning of that spike on the last World Cup, but I think this one is really going to take off. And I'm talking about things like Bet Builder, for example, right? It's definitely something that's going to be, that's our expectation. It's going to be huge. I think it will be important due to the nature of the event where you have your liability centralized in 2-3 matches a day, rather than a usual weekend where you have 30, 40, 50 or whatever. I think that there will be importance to offer those, bundles, coupons, package bets, whatever you want to call them. Basically, push the multiples to kind of try to get your margin back in if one of those games end up not in your favor. There's going to be a lot of importance to the ability to cross-sell, odds boost, that sort of stuff. And from our perspective, from a provider perspective, we're also going to have special attention on building those creative, I would say, novelty bets. I think like the weathers and attendance and total amount of corners on a day, etc., etc. Some of the, as they call, virtual matches. Messi versus Ronaldo, who's going to score more, that sort of stuff. City versus Liverpool teams. There's a lot of. I think you can really stand out as an operator if you offer some of those kind of interesting meta games, right? Meta type of bets. So there's the obvious 1x2 and over-unders and etc. But I think you can get a little bit creative and stand out from the crowd by offering those different types of bet, and that will also help you as an operator to boost your bottom line. Because as Alexander rightfully mentioned, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. If the results go wrong, it can go wrong big. So you can help yourself a little bit by taking a proactive action on that. Last but not least, I think we see recently, I know we have one of our own, but I see a lot of those coming up. Social elements, player engaging tournaments, bet recommendation engines. I think you can really use a lot of that latest technology, and happy to say we're on the forefront of that, to offer the right type of bet for the player, where the right type of bet is a combination of what he likes to bet on, but also what you as a bookie would like to propose to entice him to bet on. So I think that all these kind of player-facing features, starting from the fundamental bet builder and package bets, and ending all the way to personalization and social engagement, I think that these could help some of the marketeers stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that, and I think it depends what the customer's going to look for. Like, I like to bet on soccer, so I have different types of betting. I'll go to the exchange if I want an individual bet where I might get a slightly better price, but if I want things like bet builders, I'm definitely going to be going straight over to those sportsbooks for those sort of features. That's where they excel. And from a marketing perspective, if I'm talking about Matchbook, the betting exchange, to B2C customers, I think we've worked pretty hard on our sort of content offering and continue to do so, have over the last few months. And we've added a new chap called Miguel Delaney, who's going to be one of the team of contributors, who's going to be delivering regular podcasts and also written content before, during the World Cup for every game, and in the build up to specific sort of outcomes, outright, golden boots, things like that. We have an insight page called insights.matchbook.com, where we have a lot of people go to looking for sort of different angles and learning about different edges and so forth. So it's different for everyone, I think, and it's sort of knowing your customers at the end of the day is probably what the most important thing is. What is it that they need and what do they want to find out is ultimately going to make them convert. I think what was interesting for me last week in the event at Barcelona was seeing how there are so many of the providers now in this space who offer different types of solutions around marketing CRM. So, I wouldn't say it was anywhere near as the opportunities out there to work with certain partners and providers who can offer the level and scale today that there was previously. So everyone knows that there's a lot of pie to go around, I think, and how you offer it, has got to be unique to your own sort of user base in that respect.
Yeah. And then one thing, two of you kind of touched on there is that this is, since the last World Cup, the bet builder has become so much more of a mainstream product, something that is almost essential for sportsbooks to have for big events like this. How big a part do you think it sort of will play as a product within the World Cup? How much of the betting do you think will be using these type of bets rather than the kind of classic straight bets?
I'll start. I think we see it will play a large part. Bet builder specifically, it will allow you to create a lot of interest within a specific game. But we do see with this World Cup there will be a lot of the traditional multis coming in, particularly because of the timing of the games more than anything else. The bet builder is very good the closer you get to a game happening, and within the game if you can as well. But yeah, a lot of live betting again, of course, pushing that. So from an operator where we and honestly we don't have bet builder yet. It's actually we were hoping to have it in time for the World Cup, but unfortunately we're not ready because of our unique spin on everything that we do. So we're not quite ready yet. But we wanted it to be really good and very different to what the rest of the market offers. So I'll put a punt for us. Look out for it. It's coming. But in the meantime, we'll be concentrating on more sort of multi forward generated system bets, things like that. But we do see it playing a big part in this World Cup.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I agree with both of you. Alexander mentioned it's, and you, Daniel, as well. It's becoming an industry standard at this point. I mean, regardless of the actual usage of the product, I want to stress it out. Not all markets use it on the same level. I think it's, it's like having Coca-Cola on the shelf. I mean, it's pretty much a prerequisite if you want to open a shop, right? So I think Bet Builder is extremely popular. Interesting enough, it's one of those features that's been kind of driven by US into Europe rather than vice versa, right? So it's very interesting perspective. Some of the numbers we're seeing coming from there is, some people talk about 30% of involvement. Some people even talk about more. It's difficult to project what it's going to be on this one, but I think we're going to kind of get to the same levels we're hearing coming up from the States in terms of bet builder engagement. So, if I will be a betting man, which I'm not, try to stay away from my own shop, I would say we'll probably reach high levels of engagement, 25, 30% perhaps of the customers, probably mostly depending on the region. And Alexander couldn't be more right. You need to know your customer. I mean, the players in Africa and the players in UK will be engaging in completely different patterns, completely different levels. I mean, there's no two are alike, right? But for the ones that are already, familiar with Bet Builder, from the regular seasons, the ones that are in the market with most of the operators are offering it, I think it's definitely going to be a big thing. And by the way, in parallel with what Nick was mentioned, the rise of the live bets, I couldn't agree more with that, especially in the markets like UK, but not only. More and more live is going to come in, and we're probably going to set new thresholds, new records on live betting engagement on this World Cup versus all the previous major tournaments. So definitely a big thing coming in.
Yeah, I think for the sports books, the bet builders will be huge. I think in play is going to be huge. I think you've only got to hear, the CEOs of some of your biggest data providers out there, Sport Radar and Genius, talking about how much revenue they're forecasting around their data feeds and products that are going to be featuring in play. It's a huge part of the action. I think, although slightly maybe not bet builder, I think we look at micro betting, as they like to call it in the States. I think it'll be incredibly interesting to see how that one plays out with Mr. Paul and the investment that he's put into the company Better. So it's a very fast-moving, fluid space. I think something like the World Cup, bet builders is a bit difficult for an exchange to price up certain requests from multiple different angles of one game or multiple games, but we do have multiples, and I think a few elements. That's the sort of risk that we can handle, and ultimately our exchange multiples product will evolve over time. I think to be able to take on more risk as we can price that more effectively. But I think it's something in the office with all my friends we talk about it, and everyone wants to find that fancy for that value price, which has incredibly good markups, just like a multiple. I think for every operator, it's a great sort of profit generator. It's a great engagement piece. So you tackle both parts of commercial and marketing in one swoop. And I think I'll be really interested to see the numbers post World Cup, how bet builders get on, but I'm sure they will be doing very well.
Yeah, and then the customer experience is obviously so important to just everything in regards to a sportsbook or exchange operator. What elements of the customer experience are worth prioritizing the most when it comes to an event like this?
Okay. Good question. I think it's about, again, knowing your customer. So Dean mentioned it a few times, Alex has as well. So it's knowing your customer and knowing what your customer wants to look at and wants to bet on. It gets bandied about quite a bit, is sort of the personalized experience, but actually can you offer that personalized experience from the offer through the product, through the customer even leaving you. So can you offer that personalized experience all the way through? I think it builds a bit of a loyalty, it builds a bit of stickiness, and I guess it's again back to the shop front. It looks good on the brand, but yeah, I think from my point of view, that's what it is. It's around the entertainment and the personalization of the product to the person.
Yeah, I think I've talked a bit about the different types of bets to offer and all of that. Maybe to add to that in terms of specifically focusing on the player experience itself. I think it starts, the player experience, even though it's a sport, but we'll be focusing a lot on sports in the scope. But I think it's important to remember it starts way before. And Alex mentioned it. He talked about the KYC flow, right? I mean, it's definitely a pain point if you're in the UK. It's definitely a pain point if you're in Denmark, in one of those heavy regulated markets. So the customer experience is definitely about betting, but I think it starts before that and it goes beyond, right? So there's a lot of things the operators can do, starting from front-end adjustments, right? I mean, it's the World Cup and it's the biggest stage, as they say. So, you can express that on your front end, right? You want to create dedicated pages, a specific flow or journey that takes you to the World Cup more easily, or maybe not necessarily the whole World Cup, maybe there's a specific type of bets you want to encourage. So I think the player journey in terms of how he consumes the product and how he experiences the World Cup in your book, there's a lot to be done over there. And I think these are kind of low-hanging fruits relatively, because you don't need to invest in complicated features or integrations, all of that. You can really work a lot with your front-end team. So ease of access. And I think it's also important to kind of map out the critical touch points on the player journey, starting from that KYC, registration, deposit, bet, settlement, withdrawal, rebet. So I think if you map out the critical touch points of your player journey and you kind of together with your team, you understand where the pain points are, and at the same time, where are your opportunities, right? I think there's a lot to be done around that. And it's not only sportsbook. Probably sportsbook is the core of it, but then there's a lot of player experience that's around that. And even if the technology will perform 100% perfect, to address Nick's concern as a CTO, let's say everything's perfect on the technology side, there's always the odd customer complaint, right? There's always something, and you want to have your operational team on standby and ready to be with fast resolution to ensure the player experience. And you want to have your critical flows, such as verification, such as withdrawals, such as cash outs, deposit. You want to have everything fluid to really kind of have a 360 experience during the World Cup, because as they say, you only get to make one first impression, and it's easier if the first impression is good. So I think there's a lot to be done on those points of the player journey. And if I would pick one that I would focus, that's kind of not that difficult and could make a lot of impact, is the front end adjustments, right? I mean, what you place in front of the customer, how you place it over there, and how easy do you make him, to help him access what he wants to consume, which is based on in your client. So I think those are good points to take into account.
Yeah, 100%. I think the experience is only good if the flow is good. Where does the flow start? It starts with the onboarding. Is the onboarding good? Is the experience begins at that point? I think a lot of people forget that. Is the depositing experience good? Can I get my money out quickly if I need to withdraw as well? All these little things which may not be as sexy as the marketing or the actual user interface and the experience, but are all critical pieces to the big puzzle that is the sportsbook or the exchange. I can sit here and say, pricing and liquidity is the two most important things, for they are for us, and they probably are. But on top of that, it's the customer service. Do we really understand our customers? What sort of problems have we started to face? I think everything that you experience early on in the tournament in the first few rounds, you're only going to see more of the bigger stakes as you start to progress throughout the tournament and over the total number of weeks of the tournament. So if you can nip a few things in the bud early on, it may not be everything you can do. You may not be able to move elements of the UI around. You may be able to move some things around based on some heat mapping and understanding where players are clicking and how they're interacting with their site. Slightly different to maybe Premier League football, for example. But I think ultimately it's identifying sort of certain trends or things that are happening early on, trying to sort of fix them if you can, and also trying to make them better for the customer so that you're not losing them early on in the stage, because you want these customers to stay throughout the tournament. I think that's critical to that overall customer experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then the World Cup is obviously a global event, so it's something that attracts interest from all across the world. Can you talk a bit about the importance of localization to be able to provide the best possible product to customers within each region when that might be different?
Yeah, I guess from our experience, I mean, as an individual, wouldn't you like to be spoken to in your native language, your native tongue? Wouldn't you like to be shown the sports that you like and you enjoy, the teams you follow? Even I know this is sportsbook, but casino as well. But wouldn't you like to see the games that you like to play in your language, in your currency? Be spoken, if I have an issue, be spoken to by a customer experience agent who speaks my language. My CRM that comes to me is in my language. It's giving me offers that are interesting to me. Those are all considerations that you have to make when being in a territory that's not your home territory. So for us, as an example, we're the UK, so English being the way we go, football being number one sport, the casino being live table, casino being sort of the standard. But, take us into a territory where, handball being the number one sport, or ice hockey, a very hard language to learn is Finnish. But being able to speak to a Finn in his language is probably, counts for a lot. And I think that those are considerations that we should So, if Iran was a betting nation, you would want, Arabic being up there, and to be able to show the Iranian league along with Iran's first game against England, with favourable odds towards the Iranians. I'm not the person who's going to decide that. But those are the kind of things you've got to consider when you localize it, especially with a big event coming up.
Yes, thanks, Nick. I agree with what you mentioned. I think that localization starts obviously with the language. I think everybody's, it's pretty unanimous. You want to have the local language across the board, right? So the website, the support staff, the communications, the marketing, all of that. The next natural step is the currencies and payment methods and the flows that are sometimes unique, right? Some countries will use email, some countries will be kind of a mobile verification tendency. So it starts with the player experience and local, and I think it also translates to some extent to what Nick mentioned with Iran, to the localization of the actual how you experience the World Cup. I mean, at the beginning of the call, we've mentioned that EPL is running in parallel, right? And then we have, it's not the only one. I mean, we've talked about the fact that we have the North American sports running. So even when you approach the bets proposition, I think that you can really go deep in terms of localization. You can offer, for example, different package bets per market, something that speaks more to the audience, whether it's with the local league or perhaps with just local heroes, right? I mean, you can offer a local bet on to the Polish team with Lewandowski that would probably resonate better and louder than if you would do it in Mexico, right? And then you can do the other way around in Mexico as well. So I think the localization can start with the obvious, with the languages, the currencies, and the onboarding flows. But I do believe it can be translated deeper and integrated into your product offering around the World Cup. Just keeping the conversation on that, whether it's the local leagues, the local heroes, and I'm not a local, but probably it goes deeper than that. I'm sure there's cultural differences that if you speak to somebody who's been a Mexican bookie for 10 years, he'll tell you the differences between how these guys consume the World Cup versus how, maybe some of us out of the UK or Germany or some other markets will consume it. So yeah, to start with the obvious, but definitely go into the World Cup itself with the localization of your bet offering in the markets.
Yeah, a few things there that I actually wanted to say, but hit the nail on the head. I think the way I sort of see localization is like a recommendation engine to a degree. You've got to be able to recommend things as best you can before customers think about them. We may not have a license in Belgium, but if the majority of our people are betting on De Bruyne pre-match in play, outright for the season, content tailored specifically around that, where you're going to get good conversion rates, like that's, I'm not a marketeer, but that's the kind of thing. Hearing and speaking with my marketing team and other people is you've got to be able to recommend nowadays. If you want to think out of industry, how many times do you go onto Netflix and there is stuff recommended to you that has a percentage match based on your preferences and your past behavior? I think betting is doing a pretty good job these days of actually sort of implicating similar sort of mechanics, if it's through machine learning or other different techniques, but it's really trying to understand your customer at every level of the flow, as Dima mentioned as well. So the payment currencies, required to improve conversion rates. The marketing offers tailored specifically to customers' past behavior so that they're actually coming and seeing it and it's on the front page for them. I think there's a lot of tailoring you can do around that these days. And I think, fast forward, 5 years instead of 4, I think there's been a lot of changes around recommendations, and localization that, if you were to look at your sort of penetration and conversion rates 5 years ago, I know obviously everything's moved forward generally in digital, but I think around that sort of localization, you've got to be a recommendation engine. I think that's critical.
Yeah, great, thanks. And then the one thing we haven't mentioned, even though it's been such a prominent part of discussions of this World Cup, is the timing of it being in the winter instead of traditional summer dates. Does that change anything from your perspective? The fact that it's in the middle of European club season and just that it's different time of year, customers might be thinking differently.
Particularly in the northern hemisphere, I don't think it's you have to convince anyone that it's football season. So everyone knows it's football season, so they're really up for it anyway. I think what it does do for us as operators is probably extend the season both ways. It extended it at the start a little bit, and it's going to extend it to the end for us as well. So I think as operators, we're quite happy with it, if I'm honest, in terms of extending the season of the local leagues, if you like. In terms of the excitement and trying and the timing, I think there's a timing for the time of day for us being in the UK. So games starting at sort of 1 p.m. on a Monday. It's a bit of a challenge to bring people in. So you've got to rely a bit on sort of pre-play betting or pre-match betting. But yeah, I think from our point of view, I don't think we have to convince anyone that it's football season. So we don't have to bring anybody back in and say, hey, football's starting again. Actually, football hasn't ended; it's just carrying on, and we've got a fantastic event happening right now.
I agree with Nick. I think the timing is going to be a bit of a pickle for some of the operators. Depends on the core markets to figure out. It's something for the marketing guys, the CRM guys to sink their teeth into. In terms of winter itself, I mean, I think that ever since everyone watched the famous TV series, winter has become some of a negative, right? Winter is coming, but I think in this case, it's quite the opposite. I think that everything about the timing here is kind of good on paper. Of course, proof's in the pudding. Let's see how it turns out. But I think that cold weather for the northern hemisphere, just to mention what Nick mentioned. Nick's already got a hoodie on, and in a month, 2 months time, people will be probably kind of more indoors, and that usually traditionally helps our online industry. So I think that the cold weather of winter for the northern hemisphere would actually be beneficial to some extent for the players, for the punters to consume that event. Then to connect to what we discussed at the beginning of the call, and Nick mentioned as well now, the Premier League itself. I mean, it stops a week before and resumes a week after. That's unheard of, right? I mean, it must be seen as an opportunity, if nothing else. So I think that the timing here is unique in so many ways. It's not only the time of the year; it's also the adjacency to the other major events. It's also the continuity of major sports events before and after. It's the golden age for CRM guys to reactivate, as Nick mentioned, because you have really everything you need to reactivate any client you want to reactivate. You have the regular sports, you have the secondary sports as tennis and formula and all of that. You have the biggest sport event in the year. You have the American sports going on. Everything's on the table. So I think if I'm summarizing that kind of winter point of view, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Everything taken into account, the weather, the timing, the time of the year, should be a very, very healthy event for all of us.
Yeah, I think where the challenge has been, is probably the preparation more than anything. How does one prepare for a World Cup campaign, whilst there's also a Premier League and, rest of world football campaign running on? And I think it's very easy to fall in the trap of just assuming better fatigue, but I don't really think that's the case, as Dima and Nick have alluded to. I think when you actually put it on paper, how many, global sporting phenomenons actually finish, right around Christmas time? Not many leagues do. So, you can actually have something on which is going to keep people continually engaged for a 6 to 7 week period. While yes, they would still be involved and interested in the Premier League and other, forms of soccer that are on. Other sports leagues, you've got, the NFL, American sports, but nothing that's actually sort of coming to the point of a closure that you're going to have to wait for another 4 years again. There's no sort of finals really at this time of the year that we're kind of used to consistently seeing. So I think there's actually a lot more sort of, Dima mentioned reactivation, but absolutely agree with that. I think there's more of an opportunity though to actually keep consistent engagement across your platform. So I think some customers you'll see who've been on your platform for a long time will actually have a bigger engagement rate if you can sort of tick the boxes from that customer experience perspective of what you need to keep them engaged. And so, the value of that customer for a year could actually increase exponentially because there's actually more in line with their sort of behavior and what they're actually looking for. So, yeah, I think I think you've got to take it as a positive and think it is still the World Cup. It's a huge event for every operator, and how you can only do so much to prepare for it, but keeping those customers engaged throughout, there's a big opportunity there. I think everyone's ready to take it on.
Yeah, and then we have some questions then from the audience. To start with, there was one viewer pointed out that this will be the first World Cup with legal betting for a lot of US jurisdictions. Soccer mightn't be the most popular sport there among most people, but there are huge Hispanic and Latino communities for whom it's especially important. How have you foreseen the potential increase in attention from the US?
Mine's more hearsay rather than experience, unfortunately, because we're not there. But in terms of what we are seeing from data, etc., that's coming out of the US, that there's great potential. I mean, soccer's on the rise there, regardless. It's not only in the Latino communities; it's right across the states. So there is obviously the wave of betting and learning how to bet in the European way. It sounds a bit arrogant in saying they're learning to bet the European way, but I guess we're learning as well off them. So yeah, I guess from our point of view, we will definitely see a massive increase in everything in terms of bets coming, in terms of doing things a different way, supports for different teams, different leagues. The US league will gain momentum as well. We see it in Europe, actually, funny enough, that the US league is getting some interest over there as well. So, we see it happening, but I can't really speak to what's happening right now, but the potential is great.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Nick here. We're not live in the States, so I wouldn't say we have massive preparations for a US influx of audience coming in. But I think, quite interestingly, I'm sure everyone has been doing, Nick mentioned at the beginning of the call, stress testing. I think everybody has been doing some sort of simulations and planning towards the World Cup. Doesn't matter which jurisdiction you operate in. You kind of, you prepare for that. This is your money time as a bookie, right? So you kind of simulate the increase in the influx of customers, and I believe that the good solution providers out there, they've done their homework, and they're ready for that growth. Again, it's always a rich man problem when you have more clients than you used to, so it's a good problem to have. I think that interestingly enough, it will be very interesting to observe what's going on in the States, even if we, for the bookies that are not live there, to learn what we can expect for the next World Cup, which again will be in the States and will have 48 teams in it. So I think that we will be, all of us are going to take a lot of notes looking at this World Cup in terms of the betting patterns and the betting volumes coming from the US towards our planning, on 2026.
Yeah, I think for us, we've had quite a few conversations with different operators in the States. From a B2B perspective, there's been a few that have we've engaged with who are, keen to take exchange pricing just to have as a kind of another tool in their armory of sort of trading strategy. But I think observation is the first keyword Dima mentioned. For us, we're going to be watching Sport Trade, we're going to be watching Profit Exchange to see how those guys get on. I think it'll be really interesting to see which operators decide to pivot a lot of their time and focus towards the World Cup versus the current US sporting leagues that are running out there. I think, we've already seen the sort of crazy promos and offers start to slow down slightly. CPAs hopefully coming down slightly for a lot of those big operators, as well as the smaller operators, who has been probably a very difficult start to entering that market. But talking on the Latin part, maybe not so much the US, but we've had huge interest from there from a hedging perspective, because Brazil being the favorite for the World Cup, there's lots of exposure down there. I think every sportsbook in the LATAM region, they're really keen to make their mark on this tournament. I think there's a lot at stake for them about first sort of move a position. They've all been running through their sort of Maltese licenses, other licenses, and as Brazil start to get their stuff together, for example. But that is where we've had a huge amount of interest, and I think down more LATAM we're actually focusing on more so than I'd say the US, where it's something maybe slightly further down the road. But it'll be interesting to watch, I think, just to see how much of a sort of marketing campaign bonanza there is versus what's in running. And, do DraftKings fans who really just want to focus on their US sports as the main thing, have some offers maybe on the World Cup. But yeah, we'll see. It'll be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, and then can you talk a little bit more about the expected average percentage increase there might be in the amount of bets or the amount of visitors? In terms of actual numbers, some of the audience were wondering what that increase might look like.
I don't have exact figures which I can talk to, but I could say that, with a lot of confidence that we've looked at our platform and to scale at 150% of what the platform can handle, just in preparation. That should give you some idea. If I'm taking a bet of 1, it's definitely 1.5 times that.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult, if not presumptuous, to kind of project the exact growth. But coming back to something that's been repeatedly mentioned on this call, it really fluctuates on the markets, right? I mean, starting from the obvious, if you have your national team playing, there is a certain expectation to that, and then at the same time, if you don't, I'm going to guess the expectation is lower, right? So I think it's going to be very difficult to put a number to it. Everybody will be happy with a 50% increase, to echo Nick here. So that'll be nice. I think we'll see a lot of fluctuation between the countries and the different markets, maybe even on a continental level. Because give an example, I think that in Africa, this tournament is, in betting perspective, is going to be probably less popular than the one in the Northern Hemisphere in Europe. It's interesting to see how it's going to reflect on the States. We just discussed about that. So it will vary per market, and I'm not bold enough to put a number on it, to be honest.
I'm also not going to, unfortunately, be the first person to put a number on it, and I don't think the powers that be would appreciate if I did. But look, it could be 50, it could be 100, it could be 150. I think, focusing on just the average increase amongst website visitors is great, but if they're not really interacting with the site, then are they valuable visitors? I think for us as an exchange, it's about looking at the value of those stakes, for example, having maybe some dormant customers who, utilize the exchange for their needs, and actually seeing an increase in the value of their stakes is far more important maybe than just an increase in the total number of bets they do. There's different metrics for every business that they're looking at. And I think we've got a number of different scenarios for us of what could constitute a successful World Cup. So I think, it's different for every operator. I think, as Dima and Nick both mentioned, who, finishes where in the tournament, there's going to be different types of liabilities running around. If England win the World Cup, maybe it won't be the best result for all of us because there could be huge amounts of exposure there. If they lose in the semis or the finals, it could be a fantastic World Cup because suddenly you've got to make some serious decisions over your risk appetite, I think, in real time as those situations arise. And they're good problems to have, but they're different for everyone. So it's a tough one. But yeah, I think obviously I would say a significant increase, and something that if we quickly look back on, where we were in COVID, missing a few of these sort of global tournaments, there's probably still a few holes in the balance sheets for a lot of operators out there. So it's not just a case of, we'll take what we get. Is no, we absolutely want to maximize that opportunity to sort of, catch up on revenues that have been lost previously. And I think everyone would probably feel similar to that.
Yeah, and then earlier in the discussion we talked about that there'll be this World Cup will attract a lot of first-time bettors. So then, how do you think about retention for these customers? What can be done to be able to keep them? Once the final is over, once the World Cup has passed.
I think you would hope you did a good enough job through the whole process, like we've discussed through this call, that the customer actually appreciates and has been entertained and enjoyed betting with you and on your platform and with your brand. I can see the question actually, and it says, what is the answer? The answer is very difficult to pinpoint. As long as you try to do as much right as possible. It's harder to judge the individual. The collective works, but the individual is a lot harder. But to go back to what Alex was saying, sort of almost like a recommender, being able to recommend before he or she actually knows what they would like to bet on or do like to bet on, and then keep offering that. It's not only about the World Cup, it's about everything else that's around.
Yeah, I think we've approached this question from multiple angles today. I just want to stress out again that I think that in terms of retaining the clients, the CRM teams actually have, sorry for saying it, probably an easier job than they usually would in the summer, because once the World Cup ends, you have to wait a few weeks or a month for the major leagues and the major sports to come back, and in this case, you only have to wait 7 days. So, and that's Premier League, right? I mean, the others, some of them are even running parallel in the background. So I think that, for the CRM teams of all our business here, it's in one way, it's an easier challenge, right? There's this much shorter term to address in terms of losing or not retaining rather than losing your clientele. At the same time, operators will probably set themselves higher goals, right? Higher targets in terms of retention than the usual, given the fact of the additional sports running and the adjacency of the major sports and major leagues. At the end of the day, if you manage to keep your customer engaged through the tournament, which is what, almost a month long, it's a month essentially, I think that you should be able to focus your extra attention on the week after to bring him back for the kickoff of that. If I'm looking at UK, right? If I'm looking at UK perspective, to bring him back to the kind of returning of the league, and if it's additional sports he's interested in, as the ones we mentioned in the beginning here, the sports and the formulas, and, the tennis, all of that, it should be even easier in a sense, right? Because the cool-off period is just not the same as it usually is after the World Cup. So it's easier on paper, but we're probably going to challenge ourselves as an industry with higher retention targets, and so it's going to be a challenge all over again.
Yeah, I think the easy answer is give them a good experience. How hard can it be? The reality is very different from that. I think you've really got to break down the data actually, and really separate them out from your current and your current loyal customers, and look at every different piece of behavior analysis that you can actually find. How do they choose to deposit? How do they choose to bet? What sort of levels they're doing? When are they betting? What events? And any piece of information you can extract from their behavior and compare it to your current customers will probably give you a good run and a good idea. And how do they vary? One customer who comes on at the beginning of the tournament maybe versus at the end, or if you have someone who ideally plays most of the way through. I think talking about the sort of retention rates, you would hope that the churn would be you would see them actually cross sell into the soccer leagues that are remaining throughout the rest of this season and 23. So everyone would like it to be an easy answer, but it's one of the most important answers, I think, because how well you can do a job of keeping them engaged for the future. For us as an exchange is essential. We need customers who are playing regularly because they're such an important part of the liquidity in the ecosystem that we try and create for the overall customer base. So I think personalization, simplified UI, all of those things are important, but it's looking at that data and trying to get granular with it as best you can, pulling it into your CRM systems through your Tableaus, your Salesforces, whatever you've got internally, and looking at how long, all those things. I mean, there's so many. I'm not going to sit here and name them all, but I think it's really trying to understand and cross and compare against your current user base.
Yeah. And then, I'm sorry, I know we have a couple of other questions. I am just going to take things over with one final one myself, just very quickly. Who do you each think is going to win the World Cup?
I'll go with the populist surprise, which is Argentina.
I wanted to say Argentina from different motives. I like Argentina a lot, and I think that Messi deserves that final stamp, because that's the thing that stands between him and Maradona. Right? I'm not going to go into the discussion about Pelé at this point, all respects to him, but I think that what really stands between Maradona and Messi at this point is this one event, and I hope for Messi to take it.
Yeah, it would definitely be a great Cinderella story. I think, Brazil and France, two very, very solid teams. It's hard to look past, but I'm not going to be the boring guy who sits here and gives you one of the favourites. I'll go for a slight outsider and go with Belgium. They probably haven't had the form recently, but they've still got a few stars on paper. If they can put it together, maybe they'll have a run. So that would be my outside shout.
And I will be boring and pick Brazil. I think Neymar's been in great form. It feels about time for them. It's been a while since the last time they won it. Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Thanks to the three of you. Thanks especially to BTO Bet as our sponsor. This webinar, again, was being recorded, so it will be available on igamingbusiness.com. Thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Daniel. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.